There was an open invitation for public feedback from the U.S. Federal Reserve about central bank digital currency. It seems that people have a lot to say about the future of money. Wow, now that's quite a public policy pursuit. One that is, however, both puzzling and polarizing. My name is Kent, here at the University of Wisconsin in Madison as guest auditor and strategist, with a signature podcast and perspective about digital currencies and the epic journey ahead. Now, as you may know, a discussion paper was released by the Fed earlier this year, just as China was launching their digital currency during the Olympics. But remember also that Matthew McConaughey was featured high overhead in a hot air balloon in a TV commercial. He succeeded in harmonizing the lofty goals of future idealists alongside the benefit of more pragmatic journeys into the digital frontier, and for him it took just 30 seconds. But the CBDC is far too complex for elderly legislators in their 70s and 80s, too disruptive for incumbent bankers, too elusive for regulators, and too exploitable by the globalists. The Federal Reserve clearly needs a simplified message and a more unifying approach. I get it. The polarization is easy to understand. If people see censorship, control, confiscation, coercion, and all the Canadian chicanery, then it's easy to see why why people think that the CBDC is a slave coin and a road to serfdom. This is how freedom dies, and people don't want to weaponize the U.S. Federal Reserve to drive a progressive agenda or a techno-socialism. Are we witnessing global market chaos and inflation caused by mismanagement of monetary policy by the Federal Reserve? Donovan Choi, editor of Bankless, fears that CBDCs will needlessly accelerate the centralized codification of the language of money. And given that money is the grammar of all economic relationship, there is reason for pause. But if you see money as a public good where leading economies are preparing for a world without cash, or don't want to lose the global race to decide the future of money, then a forward-looking stance is a brighter path. If convenience, choice, collaborative commerce, civic engagement, if they all lead to self-sovereign, catalytic connectedness in the digital frontier, then praise be to CBDC. The new economy requires a new money, and policymakers are faced with difficult choices. All the more reason for a highly differentiated, purpose-driven CBDC. A freedom coin manifesto, perhaps. Let's do some forward-looking stargazing. Central banks will face two challenges, or orbital journeys, if you will, in the coming days. One, how best to maintain financial stability, while at the same time, two, embrace the momentum of looming innovation and change. On a clear night, you can almost see these figurative orbital mechanics at work, both the circular and the elliptical. The gravitational pull of trusted institutions and legacy mandates are key centralized endeavors. It is nice to be able to trust the bank of last resort in time of need. Let's call that the perigee. But there's another destination-worthy aim. It's the inescapable quest to push democratized money to the far side of the next frontier, a hyper-connected, decentralized cryptocosm. And it's the place where more open, organic, and unexpected innovation takes place. It's the fragmented edge that futurists are calling the tokenized frontier, and it's coming faster than you think. Let's call that the apogee. Issuing tokenized money on a distributed ledger is a mind-blowing concept. Indeed, central banks are scrambling to demystify CBDC possibilities and develop a risk-based response. But time is of the essence. FinTech wants to lead. China wants to dominate. The U.S. wants to preserve global reserve status. And globalists now look to make the most of pandemics, cultural and geopolitical conflicts. Here are three takeaways. First, the discussion paper is overly cautious. That makes sense because Jerome Powell emphasized that being right is better than being first. This thinking worked back in the day when there was time and space and slower moving market dynamics. Not so anymore. We live in an exponential world that is ever changing and requires nuanced leadership. And given the complexity, it is far better to get into the race and then brace for change. Think of the rugged helmsman who must now navigate cross currents and make needed course corrections. And stablecoins and decentralized finance, now they're going to offer oceans of navigable waters. Second, the premise that payments, or even faster payments, should be the foremost value proposition undercuts a more meaningful discovery. How best to apply central bank legacy and sovereign trust in the new age, and by extension through a CBDC initiative. Simply, the Fed needs to broaden the narrative beyond payments and declare a higher imperative, connecting people to prosperity in the exponential age. Finally, the Fed should use the CBDC initiative not so much to extend reach, but rather to restore trust. Start with personal sovereignty and agency. Establish a new ground state and trust foundation. Privacy and anonymity, yes, of course, but also highlight the value of attestation. Liberating individual control of data, security, and identity is the ultimate quest. An unimpeachable and immutable record to establish truth, trust, and agency. Ryan Grace of Tasty Trade sees breakthrough adoption of the digital realm, distributed governance, democratized ownership, stablecoin-enabled global economy. This is what generates a new source of excitement for the future. NFTs, for example, enable on-chain identity and allow people to prove what they own. Wow, how cool is that? Further evidence that the conversation may soon transcend crypto and even digital currency, and quicken the trend toward a broader, more galvanized value proposition around decentralized digital assets and a tokenized future. So here's the long and short of it. The CBDC initiative outlined by the U.S. Federal Reserve upon review is a beautiful idea, but not worth spending that much time on for three reasons. One, the initiative is not yet authentically motivated. Two, the mission is misaligned. And three, the trust foundation needed for a decentralized, tokenized future isn't sufficiently prioritized. Simply, the initiative appears far too incremental. It lacks conviction and a sense of urgency. So are we trapped somewhere between peril and promise? Perhaps not. With some escape philosophy, the opportunity before the U.S. Federal Reserve could be to build a CBDC that has a greater trajectory, one that generates more elliptical momentum toward the new digital economy. More plainly, we sent a man to the moon. Surely we can send a digital dollar to cyberspace. If democratic values are embedded in a sovereign coin, then by extension, it offers a highly differentiated public good, and that's a very good thing. So let's push democratized money worth spreading, to the far side of the tokenized frontier. George Gilder once said that creativity and faith in the future is what drives capitalistic economies. Sadly, thought leaders are already thinking about life after Google, life after capitalism. They see growing popular despair and political overreach by leaders who promise much, deliver very little, and print prosperity with very little clues of what is going on. So let's revive innovation, focus less on transactional output and more on creative capacity and throughput, achieving real renaissance, mainstream adoption, and participation in a connected economy. Now, finally, this week marks yet another NBA Final Series. Features coast-to-coast competition between Boston and Golden State. The most entertaining series ever, and here's why. Back in 1982, the National Basketball Association extended the perimeter of gameplay and introduced the three-point line. Not so much to increase scoring, but rather to open the floor, to bring about higher skilled talent and players with greater creative capacity. Simply, the NBA wanted to drive popularity and basketball adoption. Now, 4 decades later, in 2022, perhaps the U.S. government can do the same and extend the regulatory perimeter of play and generate catalytic innovation. After all, money that is worth spreading is money that fuels creative and productive capacity. The U.S. Federal Reserve just may learn a thing or two about coast-to-coast adoption and money that's worth spending and spreading.